An unbelievable escape. The story that shook the nation. It was a quiet Monday morning when the unthinkable happened. A prisoner had vanished from one of the country's most secure prisons. No broken walls, no tampered locks, no signs of struggle, just an empty cell and a deafening silence that raised more questions than answers. How could someone escape a facility designed to be escape-proof? Was it a conspiracy, a system failure, or the work of a criminal mastermind? The nation was about to uncover a story that seemed straight out of a Hollywood thriller, and yet it was all real. The prison in question was Blackstone Maximum Security Facility, often referred to as the Iron Fortress. Located on the outskirts of the city and surrounded by multiple layers of electrified fences, surveillance towers, and motion sensors, Blackstone was considered inescapable. It housed some of the most dangerous and high-profile criminals, with 24/7 surveillance, rotating shifts of trained guards, and reinforced cells built to withstand nearly any attempt to break out. For years, Blackstone had a clean record. No escapes, no breaches, no incidents. Until now, the man at the center of this unimaginable escape was Rafiq Hassan, a 38-year-old former computer engineer turned criminal. A genius by academic standards, Rafiq had once worked for an international tech firm before a personal tragedy spiraled his life into darkness. Accused and later convicted of masterminding one of the country's largest cyber heists, Rafiq had already earned a reputation for being cunning, calculated, and highly intelligent. He was serving a 25-year sentence for financial crimes, including embezzlement, fraud, and data theft, amounting to billions. What made his escape even more surprising was that he had never been known to use physical force or violence. He was not a gangster or a mobster. He was a mind, a planner, a manipulator. As soon as the news of his escape broke, the public response was electric. Television channels ran continuous coverage, showing aerial views of the prison and replaying expert commentary on how such a breach could occur. Social media exploded with theories. Some believed Rafiq had outside help, others were convinced it was an inside job. Memes, speculation, and even admiration began circulating. While many were terrified at the idea of a criminal genius on the loose, others couldn't help but be intrigued by the cleverness it must have taken to outsmart such a system. Lawmakers demanded answers. Security officials held emergency briefings. The general public, both anxious and fascinated, waited to hear more. In just a few hours, Rafiq Hassan had become a household name, and his escape, a modern legend. But how did he do it? What led to this moment? And could the system that claimed to be invulnerable ever recover its credibility? The answers lie in the details of a jailbreak so brilliant, it defied every expectation. To life, inside the prison, and the build-up, prisoners' behavior and reputation behind bars, observation of routines, weaknesses in the system, planning the escape with patience and precision. The calm before the storm. Life behind bars. From the moment Rafiq Hassan entered Blackstone Maximum Security Facility, he stood out, not because he was loud, violent, or rebellious, but because he was the opposite. Quiet, polite, always reading, rarely speaking. He kept a low profile and followed every rule. To the untrained eye, Rafiq looked like just another prisoner trying to serve his time in peace. But beneath that calm exterior was a mind constantly working, observing, calculating, waiting. His behavior earned him a reputation among both guards and inmates as the Professor. He never engaged in fights, refused to join any gang factions inside the prison, and spent hours reading legal books, engineering manuals, and psychology texts. Some believed he was trying to reform. Others suspected he was planning something far more complex. But since he caused no trouble, most dismissed him as harmless. What no one realized was that Rafiq was conducting a slow, methodical study of the prison itself. Over the span of months, he memorized guard shift changes, learned the layout of the building, noted which cameras had blind spots and which corridors were understaffed at night. He developed a mental map of Blackstone that rivaled the blueprints held by the architects who had designed it. Even more cleverly, Rafiq made himself useful. He offered to fix the prison's outdated computer terminals, citing his past as a software engineer. After background checks, officials, short on tech support, agreed to let him handle basic tasks under strict supervision. This seemingly innocent access gave him occasional glimpses into digital systems, not enough to directly alter security protocols, but just enough to understand how they worked. He also began building a network of silent alliances. While he never directly involved anyone in his plans, he knew how to plant ideas. A casual conversation here, a small favor there, enough to manipulate others into unknowingly playing minor roles in his bigger design. For example, he convinced an inmate who worked in laundry duty to leave a specific uniform unaccounted for. He persuaded another, who mopped hallways, to regularly prop open a rarely used maintenance door, claiming it was too hot. Inside, nothing Rafik did looked suspicious in isolation. But over time, each small action built toward a single, flawless opportunity. The planning wasn't fast. It took over a year. He knew a rushed escape would fail. He had only one chance, and everything needed to align perfectly. Weather, timing, routines, distractions, and disguise. His patience was astounding, and his attention to detail was near obsessive. He even faked an illness for several weeks to be transferred temporarily to the prison infirmary, allowing him to study that wing's exit routes more closely. When the pieces finally aligned, and the guards' vigilance had dulled due to months of routine, that's when Rafik was ready to vanish. What followed would leave authorities stunned and redefine the meaning of a secure facility. The astonishing escape plan, use of unconventional tools or tricks, disguises, distractions, or manipulation of guards, timing and execution of the escape. The masterstroke, one night to freedom. On the night of the escape, everything seemed normal, painfully, boringly normal. Guards were on their usual rotations, inmates were locked in their cells. The surveillance room showed nothing out of the ordinary. But while the prison dozed in its nightly rhythm, Rafik Hassan's year-long plan was unfolding with military precision. It began with a perfectly timed distraction. A small fire broke out in the kitchen area just before midnight. Nothing dramatic, just enough smoke to trigger the fire alarms in one wing. Guards rushed to investigate, assuming it was a typical equipment malfunction. What they didn't realize was that the fire was set deliberately using a cleverly hidden heating coil Rafik had constructed months earlier, disguised inside a hollowed-out book and placed in the trash. While attention shifted to the kitchen, Rafik made his move. Earlier that day, he had faked a minor injury to get temporary access to the prison infirmary, a less secure wing than the main cell block. There, he had hidden a janitor's uniform under the floor panel during previous maintenance. As soon as the fire alarm sounded and the hallway momentarily emptied, he slipped into the uniform and exited the infirmary through a poorly guarded service door, a door he had been observing for months and knew was often left unattended during shift changes. But a uniform alone wasn't enough. Rafik had also managed to create a fake ID tag, remarkably convincing thanks to his access to the computer terminals and his knowledge of design software. Made from plastic cut from an old food tray and covered with printed adhesive labels, the ID was crude, but under low light and with a confident stride, it passed the casual glance of the overworked staff. His next obstacle was the camera system. Here, Rafik had outdone himself. He had noticed that one of the old surveillance cameras in the eastern corridor had a flicker, a loose wire that caused it to blink intermittently. Over time, he subtly worsened the problem by applying pressure to the cable during cleaning duty. The night of the escape, that camera went black for just over 90 seconds, enough time for him to slip through a hallway unseen. Once outside the inner perimeter, he crawled through a narrow drainage pipe he had discovered months ago, one that led under the outer wall and exited near a patch of woods behind the facility. The pipe was too small for most grown men, but Rafik, who had deliberately lost weight over several months, had calculated that he could squeeze through. It was muddy, claustrophobic, and foul-smelling, but it led to freedom. By the time guards completed their fire drill and performed the next inmate head count, Rafik Hassan was already miles away from Blackstone, a free man with a 2-hour head start. His escape was not just an act of desperation, it was a masterpiece of observation, intelligence, and flawless timing. Authorities were left stunned. Nothing was broken, no alarms were triggered, no one even knew he was gone until it was far too late. Aftermath and reaction, discovery of the escape, initial confusion, police investigation, nationwide manhunt, media frenzy, and public shockwaves. The morning after. At 6 a.m., the prison began its standard morning roll call. When Rafiq Hassan's name was called, there was no response. A second call was made. Still silence. The guard, thinking he might be asleep or ill, opened the infirmary room door, only to find an empty bed, a folded blanket, and a dummy figure fashioned from rolled bedsheets under the covers. Panic erupted. Sirens blared across the facility. The warden was immediately notified. Security footage from the night before was pulled and reviewed frame by frame. Within an hour, it became painfully clear. Rafiq Hassan was gone. Not missing, not transferred, not relocated. Gone. Worse, no one could pinpoint the exact moment he vanished. What followed was chaos. An emergency lockdown was declared. Every inch of the prison was searched. Helicopters circled overhead. Roadblocks were set up on highways leading out of the area. Police departments across the region were put on alert. But Rafiq had planned everything so meticulously that by the time the world realized he had escaped, he was already ahead, perhaps in another city, or even another country. The prison staff, humiliated and panicked, scrambled to understand how a non-violent cybercriminal managed to bypass layers of physical security designed to contain murderers and terrorists. Forensic teams inspected the infirmary, the fake ID, the dummy in the bed, and the disabled camera. The more they learned, the more they realized they had been outsmarted at every turn. Nothing had been forced. No tools had been discovered. He had used what was already around him: timing, knowledge, and a chilling level of psychological manipulation. When the news finally broke to the public later that morning, it was like a lightning bolt across the nation. Major television networks interrupted regular programming with breaking news. Social media exploded with hashtags like Ham Rafiq Escape, Shamrash Blackstone Breach, and The Invisible Exit. Experts debated every aspect of the story. Was this a sign of catastrophic system failure, or the rise of a modern criminal genius? Public reaction was mixed. Some were furious, demanding accountability from the prison authorities and calling for the resignation of senior officials. Others were fascinated, even impressed, by the brilliance of the escape. Documentaries and news specials were rushed into production. Rafiq's story quickly took on a legendary status, a real-life puzzle that no one had solved. Politicians stepped in, vowing swift reforms and launching inquiries. How had a man like Rafiq been given access to computers? Why weren't weak points like the infirmary or the camera system better managed? Who else might have been involved? Despite their public statements, few had answers, only growing embarrassment. Meanwhile, a nationwide manhunt was underway. Airports, train stations, and borders were being monitored. Rafiq's face was now on every television screen, in every newspaper, and plastered across digital billboards. Anonymous tips flooded in, dozens by the hour, but none led to him. Rafiq Hassan had become a ghost, and the question on everyone's mind was the same. Where is he now? Conclusion: genius or desperation? Analysis of the prisoner's intelligence and bravery, questions on prison security and reform, moral and ethical reflections on the escape. Genius or desperation? The legacy of Rafiq Hassan. As days turned into weeks and authorities failed to locate Rafiq Hassan, public fascination only deepened. The initial shock had given way to a broader national debate, not just about how he escaped, but what his escape really meant. Was Rafiq a dangerous criminal exploiting a flawed system, or a misunderstood genius forced into crime by a life that had dealt him a cruel hand? Was his breakout an act of reckless desperation, or a cold, calculated move to reclaim his freedom? One brain versus $1 billion prison? What became increasingly clear was that Rafiq's escape had exposed more than just a hole in Blackstone's security. It revealed a deeper vulnerability. the human tendency to underestimate intelligence when it's quiet, patient, and nonviolent. Because Rafiq had not been loud or threatening, guards grew lax. He had used their assumptions as tools, their routines as openings. The real escape weapon wasn't a gun or a shovel, it was his mind. This raised troubling questions for prison authorities and policymakers. If one man could study and dismantle a high-security system from the inside using only his intellect, what did that say about the system itself? In the weeks that followed, internal investigations led to the suspension of multiple prison staff, an overhaul of training procedures, and the fast-tracking of funding for technology upgrades. Every security lapse, from the broken camera to the loose ID checks, was now evidence of institutional overconfidence. Yet not everyone viewed Rafiq through the lens of law and failure. To many, especially among the youth and social media users, he had become something of a legend, a modern-day Houdini. Posts labeled him as the man who broke the unbreakable, and hashtags like #respect the mind trended for days. Some even questioned whether Rafiq's crimes were worthy of the sentence he received in the first place, pointing out that he never harmed anyone physically, and that he had served more time than violent offenders. Of course, others warned against glorifying a man who had broken the law and undermined public safety. This moral tug-of-war reflected a deeper truth. Rafiq Hassan's escape was not just a prison break. It was a mirror held up to society, challenging how we define crime, intelligence, justice, and freedom. The manhunt continued, stretching across borders with Interpol alerts and diplomatic involvement. But Rafiq seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only theories, trails of admiration, and institutional embarrassment. Some claimed he had fled to South Asia, others said South America. A few believed he had changed his identity entirely, living quietly in a village somewhere, perhaps even watching news reports about himself. In the end, whether he is eventually caught or not, one thing is certain. Rafiq Hassan's Jailbreak has become a case study in criminal psychology, system failure, and human ingenuity. Genius or desperation? Hero or villain? That perhaps depends on who's telling the story.